Welcome to the ITSP Magazine Podcast Network. You are about to listen to an episode of the Audio Signals podcast with Marco Ciappelli. In this new season, Audio Signals is repositioning its antennas, focusing not just on the stories, but on the storytellers. In our modern hybrid analog-digital society, the art of storytelling has never been more vital or displayed such a diverse array of forms. Recognizing this, our conversations will spotlight the narrators, providing a unique exploration into the minds behind the narratives. From authors to podcasters, visual artists to songwriters, and everything in between, we will engage with all who contribute to this extraordinary tapestry of human experience. We are all made of stories, after all.
Hello, everybody. This is Marco Ciappelli. Welcome to another episode of Audio Signal podcast, where we recently repositioned the antennas to talk with authors, but not only. It's not just about authors of books or playwright. It's about any kind of story that we share. It can be in music, it can be in video, film, even painting. Any artist for me is a story. And to be honest, everybody has a story to share. We are all made of stories. Now, in this case, actually, it is about a book, and it's about a story that when I saw it, it reminded me of one of those story, kind of like the Da Vinci Code that I found very, very complicated, and is always think like that's the kind of story I will never be able to write myself. I'm more versus a fantasy type of style. So I think it requires a lot of research and a lot of motivation. And I'm not the one actually that is going to talk about that, because I do have the author here with me, and his name is Jeff Sheckter. I hope I pronounced that correctly. And we're going to talk about how he decided to write his first book from a completely different career and what the book is all about. So, Jeff, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Marco. Thanks for having me. I really appreciate it.
Oh, absolutely. It's very intriguing when I saw you and presenting yourself as a guest and coming and talk about the book. I was like, this sounds like a story that I want to not only read and learn about it, but the motivation, like what's the story behind the story. But before that, I want to know the story behind you, Jeff. So if you can give a little introduction to our audience, who you are. Yeah,
sure. I'd love to. You pronounced my name right. It's Jeff Sheckter.
Yes.
I've spent the vast majority of my career, the last 25, 30 years, as an experiential real estate developer. I was the COO of the company behind Mall of America in Minneapolis, West Edmonton Mall in Canada, and the American Dream in New Jersey. For listeners that aren't aware, these are the three largest entertainment and retail centers in North America. They have like water parks, amusement parks, hotels, skating rinks, a lot of retail, the best of the best in aspirational and luxury retailers. So it's really like a mini city under one roof. And so I've been building and expanding and operating those projects most of my life. The last of those three large projects was American Dream in New Jersey, an amazing center, just located actually right across the skyline from Manhattan. And the project was underway for quite a while. It had previous developers involved, and the financial crisis that happened a while back. And so we took it over and anticipated a relatively, small renovation, a little bit of lipstick, but it turned into a much more far-reaching endeavor. And we ended up building amusement parks and water parks, and it really took it to another level. And so I spent the last couple of years prior to COVID completing that, getting it open. When I got there was, outside of legal and leasing, there was like a handful of employees. When I left, there was about 1,700. And so it was a matter of really getting the whole thing up and running operationally, getting all the teams going, get corporate culture running. And just as we really put a bow on all that and opened with some great fanfare, COVID hit. And we had to obviously go, New York City was one of the first places that shut down. So, and that's obviously a large gathering center. And so for us, it was really difficult. We were bricks and mortar retail and a pandemic and, online shopping and whatever. So we had our work cut out for us. When the center was closed for COVID, I moved my family to the Bahamas to ride out the ensuing chaos. And I found myself for the first time in a long time without a quote unquote 9 to 5. And I'm a voracious reader. I love the whole storytelling piece. And I've always had in the back of my mind that, I could write a book. I should write a book. And for the longest time, I kept anticipating that it was going to be a business book or something on negotiation. And when it was time to put pen to paper, so to speak, I decided that I was going to go to what I loved, which is fiction. And while I was staring at the ocean one day and not a lot on my calendar, a reminder actually popped up from a program that I completed at Harvard Business School. I went to Harvard for 3 years, completed the OPM program there. It's owner, president, management. It's like a EMBA, CEO finishing school type of course over 3 years, worldwide attendance. So you get to meet a lot of really interesting and great people from around the world. And in one of those modules, we had one of our professors bring a short-term, medium-term, and long-term goal to the class, and had everybody, do some ideation for a while, and then come up with what you thought those 3 things were, and then to actively put it into your calendar. And I remember coming up, write a book was my long-term goal, as a really generic input. And I remember it popping up, and I fast forward 1 year and popped up again. It's supposed to delay. I'll do that one time and fast forward 1 year. And it came up on like a January 2nd that write a book. I'm looking out in the ocean thinking, you know what, this is my opportunity. And so I I started off on that trajectory.
So you didn't have prior experience in creative writing. This was really something you had in mind, and then you finally got your hands on it, and you just went for it.
Yeah, exactly. I have a tech background. I'm a tech guy and a computer guy. A lot of the systems and processes and things that I've put into place at our centers were all really tech focused. And yeah, like really my creative outlet was, in the design and fabrication of what we're going to do. And it's like the centers that we have are pretty impressive. And there's a much more broad canvas than you would normally see at a shopping center. So I got to express my creativity through those venues. But when it came to writing or storytelling, this was a one-off to begin with. But I fell in love with it. I love the process. I love the end result, obviously, and something way outside of my comfort zone.
All right, well, that's fantastic, because if you went from zero to this, which is described as a action-packed thriller with, I'm understanding, a lot of reference in different cultures and historical period of time, and then there is a pathogen involved into it, so it sounds very complex. So I'm curious, like, first of all, how this idea came. Were you inspired by some movies that you saw, some other book that you read, or just kind of linger a story in your head?
All of the above, actually. Anyway, really, it gets to your intro when you're talking about, storytelling and the route that people take, and, just storytelling generally in people's lives. I had this kernel of an idea, and really it was using elements of, I'm a Jewish guy, and I'm relatively well read on our religion and culture. And there's a lot of really fascinating elements that have, what you see at face value, and then there's like the story behind the story. And so there's a lot of those things that I thought were really cool. I'm a big believer. I love Dan Brown's writing. I think he's great. I like the action guys like Jack Carr and The Terminalist, which is now a movie, which is really good. Lee Child and the whole Reacher series. And so I had this desire to want to write like these people that I read on a relatively regular basis. And I actually told my kids, I'm like, you know what? I think I'm going to write a book, and it's going to be a bestseller. And then my second book is going to be how to write a bestseller for your first book. And it's like, hey, that's great, Dad. You've been drinking too much tequila on the beach. And, and so I actually, because I had no clue what I was doing, I opened up I brought, I don't know, like 50 books with me when I was in the Bahamas. I wanted to follow a format where it would at least have some semblance of like writing. So I cracked open the first page of James Rowland's novel, who's also one of my favorite authors. And it was really like, a paragraph of scenic description, and then 2 lines of dialogue, and then, a scene setting, and then something else. And so I had my own story, but I just said, okay, well, there's a paragraph of description. So I looked out and I described this ocean view that's in front of me, and I'm a scuba diver. And so I talked, my opening scene was this whole like scuba diving scene, say, write what you know. But by the end of the chapter, it actually read like what I thought to be like a real book. So I kept running back into the house saying, oh my God, I actually wrote something that doesn't look terrible. And then chapter 1 turned into 2, turned into 10, turned into 20. And before I left the Bahamas, which would have been, I guess, May or June of 21, I had 3/4 of the book already penned. I finished most of it when I got back here, and then went through a relatively intense editing process. And then decided that, I did a lot of reading on getting representation from agents, and getting do you want to go to a traditional publishing route? Do you want to go indie publishing route? And like I said before, I'm a voracious reader, and that's not always just the fun stuff. And so in my own profession, I dive deep into drawings, into the technology behind certain things. So I really get a granular understanding of how something works. And then I can make very informed decisions. And so I kept that methodology when I wrote, and really decided to read everything there was to be read on publishing, indie publishing, traditional publishing, agents, the whole thing, going from Kindle and Amazon and audiobooks, to get what I think is a pretty good understanding of the landscape for a new author. I'm really glad I did that after I wrote my book, because after seeing it, I think it's such a daunting task that I'm not sure I would have ever wrote if I knew how hard it was going to be after. Writing the book was the easiest part of this whole process. So I launched it in August, on August 8th. And my first run sold out, my second run sold out. And a few weeks ago, it actually hit the bestseller lists on my techno thriller genre for Amazon and on Kindle. It was number 11 on Kindle and number 55 in print on Amazon. So my prediction for getting a bestseller, while it's not New York Times number 1 yet, it's got a lot of love, and people seem to really enjoy the story.
Wow. That's definitely a good way to start it. I guess then you went to your kids and you said, I told you.
Yeah, and then I rooked them into helping edit. So I have 5 boys, and my 2 oldest got the ungrateful task, but I've thanked them profusely in the books.
Were they giving you good feedback?
Oh yeah, amazing. My oldest, he's just finishing his LSATs, going to law school. He didn't like my first cover that I worked on ad nauseum for months. And he was playing around with AI and DALL-E 2, and he came up with a really cool inspiration. My original cover is a little more complex. It had like an element of I'm sure you may not see it, but the existing cover, the one that I published, is a blue book. It's got a faint circuit board sort of watermark in the background, and a Greek warrior's helmet on the front in profile. And it's just.
But I also see a DNA helix.
DNA helix, that's right. DNA helix. There's a little bit of tidbits. The other one was like a cave looking at a Greek temple with like a shadowy figure in the background. So it was like that, and it was orange. So vastly different book. And he was playing around with DALL-E 2, and he's like, Dad, this is like a lot more like impactful. Just has this like particular image. So we tweaked it just a little bit because as things come out of DALL-E, they're not very polished, and that ended up becoming, after 8 hours, it turned into the cover that I kept versus the 3 months of design and money spent getting the first one going. But I'm happy with the way this turned out. And then both of them ended up reading the book, I don't know, probably 5 times right now, and editing and going over the proofs. So they were integral in getting the book to where it is today. Although, as authors always say, all mistakes and errors are solely my own. So,
those are part of the story, right? I mean, I let's go back to your inspiration. And I have read, Dan Brown. I've fallen in love with him, but I also recognize how many of these books that I'm fascinated by, puzzle solving and intricate plots. I always say my brain doesn't work like that. I consider myself a very creative person from a fantasy perspective. My background is advertising and marketing. I can be an art director, like you were probably doing with your other business. But I want to go over the blueprint that you need to have when you write a book like this, because you have to connect a lot of dots. And correct me if I'm wrong, if you're such a natural that everything really came, but do you ever have to walk back on the story and be like, ouch, I need to rewrite something because it doesn't connect anymore?
So the book reads very much like a Dan Brown, if I could be so as bold as saying, but it reads like a Dan Brown book, and it's a puzzle-driven thriller. It takes place all over the world. You're from the Vatican, Jerusalem, New York, like it travels the globe. The only thing that I really had to rewrite was as I said, I was writing this in the Bahamas during the pandemic, and for the first, maybe 10 chapters, there were elements of the COVID pandemic in the book. And so I remember just one particular thing like this. Some guy was driving up the West Side Highway of New York. I used to live in New York, so I have the layout of New York when they're talking about this. And I used to be stuck in that traffic all the time, driving across the GW Bridge to go to Jersey. And so I said, the traffic was light on the West Side Highway due to the pandemic and everybody being at home. And little things like that weren't integral to the story, but it very much dated the story and gave it reference to a point in time. And I do have date and time markers at the start of all my chapters, but they don't have a year. So it's just present day. And then there's a chronology that you can follow so that you're not, I should say lost in the story, but you have a better frame of reference for when certain events are happening. And so I did have to go back and reroute that. And so it wasn't, light traffic due to COVID, it was light traffic due to the drizzle and the grayness of the day and things like that. So that was probably my only significant rewrite. As far as the story goes, I knew from the beginning how I wanted the story to end. And I knew that there were certain elements that I wanted to express and sort of build upon. And so I had those laid down as mile markers throughout the story. And then it was really just a matter of filling in the gaps. And so for those, I turned to what a rabbit hole that was, but turning to conspiracy theories that would give an air of legitimacy to certain of the elements and of the story, right? And so without giving too much of the story away, the general plot is that there is I'm going to call him a madman, but he's an eco-terrorist that is hell-bent on wanting to destroy the world because he is unhappy with what mankind has been doing to the planet from an environmental perspective. And I think it's also very, and you find yourself at times, when you read the book, hopefully, nodding along to some of the diatribes that this guy is going through because nobody wants to see our planet destroyed. His methodology to the solution is obviously destroying all of humanity is not a feasible solution. And so I think it's really important to have antagonists that you can relate to in some ways, so they don't just seem like just these really terrible people and there's nothing in common, there's no redeeming value to them, because I don't think that you can create that connection in the story if you can't relate to somebody. But if you can at least see their paradigm and then, obviously disagree with their response, but you have to have some sort of empathy for them. I think it really ties the reader into the story more. And so he's created what seems to be an indestructible pathogen that is poisoning the grains and staple crops of the world, and our heroes of the day are trying to stop him. And so there's a race through, and that's the gist of the book, that they want to stop this calamity because this pathogen would take hold in relatively quick fashion, would create massive starvation. The animals that are eating the crops are also dying, so you have no, plant life that's edible. You'd have no livestock that would be edible, and to be able to satisfy the demand of 7 billion people, the world would turn inside out in relatively quick order. And so they're trying to stop that. The elements are you find out that this pathogen is really something that has been around for a long time, and to stop it, they need to recover particular artifacts throughout history. And they're like, these are the ones that people know, but it's like the Holy Grail. There are certain artifacts they dig up at the resting places of like Adam and Eve, and you do a tour through like the Vatican and the secret chambers of like what the Pope has, racing all the way out. So it's got a lot of really cool elements. And then when you find those particular artifacts, each one is sort of a puzzle in and of themselves that leads to the next puzzle and the next location they have to find, until ultimately they can find this hidden secret or this hidden source that they could use as a antidote to what's coming. I'm trying not to give as much away because I want people.
Yeah, no, I think you just said enough. I was going to stop you. I was like, don't give it up all the way. It sounds fantastic. And when you describe the location, the objects, some of them are in the mythology realm in a way. We don't know exactly what they look like or if they're there. But when you describe the room of the Vaticans or other places, did you do a really heavy research to stick as much as possible to reality, or did you kind of rewrite?
Yeah, so that's a really good point. Yeah. I tried to do a little bit as much as possible that's realistic. So I was actually with my family while I was writing that particular chapter. I had everybody in Rome. We were doing a little tour through Europe, so we went to Paris and Rome, and went to the Vatican. And so there was as much ink as I could spill that would keep everything as realistic as possible. And then obviously when it came to the Pope's hidden vault where all the big secrets are, they didn't invite me. That wasn't part of the tour.
No, so, you didn't ask.
So it's great to riff on it. And I described it in really great detail, but utilizing whatever elements that I saw and the design features that were in the Vatican, you could extrapolate as to if the Pope did have a private vault, what do you think it would look like? And so there's like a golden cross inlaid into the floor, and it's a really beautiful room, and it's got like this majestic sort of holy aura to it, etc. So nobody can tell me that's not what it looks like, because I don't think anybody reading my book has been invited by the Pope to check out the Vatican's innermost secrets or what they have in there. And so I leaned a lot on some conspiracy theories of what does the Vatican really have in their possession, and then there's a little bit of a scientific flair when they get to, because there's nanotechnology that's involved and AI that's involved that play, again, really integral parts to the story. And so it's funny, when I wrote the AI piece of it, it almost read like Jarvis from Iron Man, a little bit too conversationally, and like, how could you really have a conversation with a computer in that simple length in a language format and still have it understand what you mean? And then, fast forward to when the book is published, ChatGPT is out, and that whole bridge of, could AI really be that effective and simple to use is now not something that I would have to really spend a lot of time pushing the narrative to, this is what's coming, because it actually showed up on people's doorsteps. So
I know it's amazing how 6 months ago looks so different, or even 2 years ago. Yeah,
exactly.
Sure. You're talking about DALL-E 2, and I'm like, well, if you had DALL-E 3, you probably would have done it faster, or Midjourney already. Yeah, that's pretty cool.
Midjourney's incredible.
I want to pick your brain on something that I like to bring up with a lot of with other guests, which is this. So you're writing this style. You're writing something that many people would look at it and be like, this is a taunting feast that I can't do, is a journey I can't take, because maybe I feel more comfortable in a more descriptive, maybe more dialogue based, maybe a different style. So I would like your perspective as an avid reader and a new author, how much it plays, again, your background and how you grew up your culture into, then turn you into a particular kind of style of writing, right? I mean, I don't, my point is, I don't believe that anyone can write everything, because we're all kind of different. And I would love your perspective. You've been traveling, you have a specific culture and an experience in work. So what's your take on that? And how somebody decide this is what I want to write?
I think I was influenced from a writing perspective. I think I was influenced more by the people that I read than I was by the product of my environment. I enjoy the way that certain books can elucidate on a story, and sometimes it's detail ad nauseum, but you realize that at some point later in the book that detail was there for a purpose, not just for world building, and certain facts and figures will come out where before you thought they maybe were a bit extraneous. So I like a little bit long. My book's like 475 pages. It's a little bit longer than a typical story, but and there maybe is a little bit in there that I could have taken out to make it a little bit less, but there isn't 100 pages in there that I could shred without really impacting the story. So I really like the longer format. I think that, if you want to dig into a book, it seems sometimes a little, if you really love it, unsatisfying if you get through too quickly. Rushing through like a 5-star meal.
Mm-hmm.
Like they want you to savor every morsel and the visual and everything versus just like getting to the end of it and getting dessert and getting the bill and getting out. So I like that it's a little bit longer in length. I like that there's the puzzle-driven thriller genre where you're not really just following, numbers 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and everything just works out the way they should. That there's these things that would unfold that take you off on some random tangent, but finding a way to bring that back in the story so that it's all really one cohesive story as opposed to these fragments of little stories is the hard part. I'd like to say that I was like really good at it, but to be honest, the way that this came to me was almost, I don't want to sound like spooky fluky, like it was prophecy, but it was almost like I hate saying it because it's not, but a prophetic vision where I would have this idea and I would somehow visualize it as if I was watching a movie or a show, and then sort of pause it. And then I'd write in as much detail to capture what I saw, and then just move on to the next chapter and the next chapter. And like, what's the next, almost fast forwarding the movie and then going back and transcribing what I saw. And that was really how I wrote it. It was bizarre because I didn't have any real fishbone done. I didn't, or a map of how I wanted the book to go. I didn't have, this many chapters and this was going to happen, which really you should do. I just started writing. I wrote the whole thing chronologically, started chapter 1, went to the very, very end, and then did a little bit of an edit, but didn't really move any chapters around or things like that. So I think I'm maybe a little bit unique from what I've read. I don't know that that's a great method to use, but for me, it was effective. And I'm halfway plus or minus through the second novel, writing it in a similar fashion, although I'm trying to be a bit more proactive on the layout than I was before, only because I didn't know what I didn't know back then. And I'm trying to improve the process a little. But for me, it's really the power of storytelling, which is why I was really interested in your podcast, because, the Jewish religion, we have we have our Torah, and it's really replete with stories upon stories. And then those stories are elucidated by other stories. And to me, it's really interesting because I think the stories themselves have, they almost take on a life of themselves. They outlive their authors. They outlive their genre or their publication date, even if you call it. And they sort of just add to that tapestry of storytelling that's been passed on from generation to generation. While my book is, not anything that people are going to, want to model their lives around or anything like that. I think it just shows that you're using elements of stories and people, biblical people in this particular instance that were, thousands of years ago, and you still can find some relevance to put them into like a spy novel or an action-packed, puzzle driven thriller today. And they still have the same relevance, and it's not like the people aren't still here and, and if they're people and not an object, then there's no real physical representation of that, but the story lives on, right? The story has its own power, and being able to reuse and integrate stories that were never really connected previously, whether it's because of a chasm of time or geography or even just genre. I think it's really cool that you can bring in like Adam and Eve and the Holy Grail and nanobots and AI, and you read the story and not any of them feel, they all feel appropriate in the story, and you couldn't ever read the story without having it. And so to me, that's just like, I don't know, I love the fact that I got to add my 2 cents to that whole thing, and to show people, to some extent, as a bit of a role model, I hope, for my kids, that I was at a very successful career as a real estate guy. I'm the chairman of a biotech company right now. And, short of reading, books are relaxation, but it's not anything that I would have ever envisioned that I would be able to do or write anything of any quality that somebody would be interested in. And like I said before, I think I'm a pretty proficient businessman and entrepreneur. And I was always thinking that I'd be able to share lessons and tips and tricks that I'd learned through my career with others, because I had confidence that I knew what I was talking about. And I think there were things that I could share with others that they could use in their life that would help them in their business or in negotiations with their husbands, wives, spouses, kids, whatever. But the fact that, and it was a very auspicious time and I had the opportunity to do it, but I think it's really important that people don't, and like yourself, I've read your bio and a lot of people on your show, that we're relatively set in our professional lives and we're comfortable and we're good at it. And then to do a 180 and, go off on some other tangent where it's way outside of somebody's comfort zone and it's not at all what they, had in their life's plan. I think if you find any modicum of success with it, it's a really incredibly rewarding experience in somebody's life. Like I always tell people, it's sort of a bucket list item to write a book. It wasn't a bucket list item for me, but it sort of is now. And that I, not that I wrote a book, but I went through the process of writing a book and editing and publishing and learned an entire field that is so diverse from what I was comfortable with before. I think it's just the example to set for your kids that if you don't like where you are, or even if you do like where you are, but you want to explore something different, that it's never too late, and you have to try. And sometimes you're going to fail, but in my case, I was successful with it, and that can be found in every aspect of life. And so it's good to be brave. It's good to that there's that old adage: if you're comfortable, you're not growing. And
that's right.
And so I decided to grow, and it worked out.
Well, I think you made a perfect close to the episode, which made my life much easier. But at the same time, I do want to add one thing, which is, you packed a lot in this last piece of the conversation. And I'm looking at the book, the cover, and every time you were saying something like, oh, I'm in... I've done this in my past. I love technology. I'm involved in a biotech right now. And I'm like, it's all there, right? I mean, I'm thinking the story you described, the cover of the book, and I'm like, ultimately, you write something because it contains all the adventures that you had in the past, all the things that you have experienced, all your past lives, whatever you want to call it, and you kind of put it there. So I think it's a great example of, don't do something because or you think is going to sell, but do something that you love and do something that you're passionate about. And if you're lucky, then it's gonna be a commercial success too. But what I'm saying is, start from your passion, and I think this is a typical great example of that.
Yeah, and I think people's lives are a lot more interesting, and the experiences that they live are a lot more. I think there's a lot more that people can share if they're just repackaged in a certain way. So, like, there's nothing in the book that's really my life story at all, and it's all very much arm's length fiction. Again, I've tried to keep everything within the realm of possibility. It doesn't stretch into science fiction, fantasy, or anything. Everything is a very plausible, albeit unlikely, but a plausible outcome. Mm-hmm. But a lot of those elements I took from my boring old life that, as long as you can put a kernel of truth into something, then it gives you some something to like sort of build upon. It's a solid foundation. And then once you build on that, you can add a couple, throw in a conspiracy theory or two and a little bit of speculation, and this boring old element becomes something really rich and and thought-provoking. And I think everybody
we got back to the beginning. We all have story to tell.
That's right. Everybody's got a story to tell.
Yeah, and I want to finish with that. So Jeff, thank you so much. I really enjoyed this conversation. Made me think. I hope it's going to make a lot of people think, and good luck with the book. I will put all the notes to get in touch with you, to visit your website, and I hope people are going to read the book, give it a chance, sit down and take their time to go through all those pages. But it sounds like it's a great adventure. So it's the Daedalus Protocol by Jeff Sheckter. And Jeff, thank you so much for spending some time with me and having this conversation.
I appreciate it. Thanks for having me on.
All right. And for everybody, check the notes and subscribe if you like these stories. There'll be many more coming up soon on Audio Signal Podcast on ITSP Magazine. Take care, everybody.
We hope you enjoyed this episode of Audio Signals with Marco Ciappelli. If you learned something new and this conversation made you think, then add this show to your favorite podcast player, subscribe to our YouTube channel, and share the ITSP Magazine Podcast Network with your friends, family, and colleagues. If you represent a company and wish to connect your brand to our conversations and our audience, visit itspmagazine.com to learn how to sponsor one or more of our shows. We hope you will come back for more stories and follow us on our journey.